I think from my side, so I'm Sarita, I'm the founder of the Sustainable Alpine Tourism Initiative, which started as a result of my research at Cambridge University, looking specifically at circular economy, but then broadening out over the last year into alpine tourism, partly because I love going in the mountains and love being outside. So from my perspective, the Sustainable Development Goals were created back in 2015 by the United Nations, and they were really created as a roadmap to try and support businesses, communities, governments and countries to actually transition towards a sustainable development pathway. And they really tackle a broad range of issues from environmental, social, governance and more. And from my perspective, it's a really great way to actually look at sustainability holistically. I think all of the experts that we've got today are going to be delving into different aspects of that agenda. And I'd just love to welcome the panel here today and thank you so much for joining. So on the panel today, we've got Karin Huber-Heim, who's actually the director of the Circular Economy Forum in Austria. And that's one of the first transversal platforms for looking at circular economy there in Austria. She's also a board member of the UN Global Compact Network of Austria. And Karin has actually been an incredible support and energy throughout this project. And really supported intellectually and also, to be honest, emotionally in terms of this journey of creating SATI. We've also got Gavin Fernie-Jones, who's the founder of One Tree at a Time. And he's based in Courchevel and has an incredible program of engaging chalets and engaging SMEs in decarbonisation, whilst also running an independent group of fix-it shops as well that really look at progressing circular economy. You've got Alex Staniforth, who's an adventurer and also a mental health campaigner. And Alex has gone on, well, such an incredible journey. He really is probably one of the most tenacious people I've ever met. He's also got an incredible determination to support the community, to try and improve mental health and support well-being through getting outside in nature. And I think specifically in mountain environments, that's something that maybe we need to go back to, especially in this post-COVID world. You've got Crosby, who's the founder of Mountains for All, and Karin is really an incredible force of connecting different people and really trying to progress the sustainability agenda across all of the Alps. So she's based in Switzerland, but she's got a really great insight into multiple regions across the Alps, from France to Austria to Italy and further afield. You've also got Gabriele Tischler, and Gabriele is a senior representative from the Chamber of Commerce of Salzburg land in Austria, and she works really closely with businesses, with the government and also with academia and research to actually try and progress some of the localized issues that businesses and corporates might be facing. So quite an interesting perspective on SDG 8. And then our facilitators for today, which I'm really excited to welcome them. One is Natasha Alford, and she's a researcher with me at CISL. Natasha's actually joining from Australia today, so I have to thank her for staying up and being part of this session. But Natasha is a really good friend of mine actually from the course at university, and she specialises on looking at circular economy in a more of a policy context. Her background is law, but I'll let her introduce herself a bit later. And also Meryl Wingfield, who's an expert on sustainability and infrastructure, and also a good friend of mine from Cambridge, and again a specialist on circular economy as well. So yeah, really interesting panel today, and really looking forward to welcoming everyone, and thank you for joining this session. So we're going to move first to Karin. So Karin, I think in this journey of kind of, you know, the 2 years of setting up SATI, I think it's really interesting the kind of dialogues we've had around the SDGs and how they could really be quite a progressive roadmap for mountain regions to address some of the challenges that we're facing today. And I think in this, I say post-COVID, but it's really COVID impacted because we're still all living and breathing it. How do you think the SDGs are relevant as a lens for mountain regions to actually address some of those systemic, environmental, social, and broader challenges that we're facing today?
Thank you, Sarita, for this question, and thank you for having me here. Yes, I think they are extremely relevant, as the goals are universal, inclusive and transformative. They, of course, also apply to mountain regions of any kind, whether it's summer tourism, winter tourism, environmental issues that occur throughout the year in a mountain region. But let me put it this way. The SDGs are the vision for 2030 that we would like to achieve in order to become a sustainable society, or in order to be able to live a sustainable life within the planetary borders. So this is definitely something that applies to the region, because climate issues, peace, prosperity, a healthy environment, safety, the health of people applies to any region in this world. So, of course, also to the mountain regions. And yes, every region in the world, whether it is touristic or not, definitely has their own roadmap to go there, because what the SDGs are not is they are not a roadmap for everyone. So it's not the same way for everyone to go there. It will not be the same SDGs that you need to contribute to improve the way we are living and using our resources. So there are certainly special goals where mountain regions need to look into much closer, or need to put more focus on, or contribute much more than others. But certainly for all of us and for everyone, the SDGs, this vision should be seen as something like a North Star, like a compass, so that we all start to move into the same direction and not into different directions of a future that can easily be different. I mean, we could have a robot future or a technological future without humans. We could have a catastrophic future with biophysical phenomena absolutely diminishing our life quality on this planet. So if we have the possibility, and now we have goals and we have certain targets, 169 beneath, that show us a way to go, what would be needed to move our societies, our businesses, our education systems into the right direction. And I think this could very well be a change maker in the way we do things, or we think things, because it is also needed that we rethink everything we do. It's a paradigm shift. The SDGs are not something that you can take the 17 goals and make a checklist. Oh, I'm contributing to this, and I'm doing this already, and I'm doing this goal already. We're not doing any of those already. We all need to contribute much, much more. And it's a paradigm shift, especially for business, but I guess for all of us, not to think about what's in for me when I look at the SDGs, but rather to how can I contribute to make my region, my city, my country, the world a better place for all of us, and really leave no one behind. So this is really something that, of course, applies to every region, whether mountains or not.
And I think I love what you say in that paradigm shift, because I think there's so many examples of where people say, you know, how on earth do I apply this? You know, it feels like a broad agenda, and on the ground, what am I supposed to do? And I think that's why having each of you here today is fantastic, because we're really bringing tangibility to that agenda. And that brings me really nicely, actually, to Gavin as well. Sorry, I should have said at the start, but at the side of the screen, you can see that during the session, we've got QR codes. So those link to each of the speakers' LinkedIn accounts, and we'd really encourage you to connect with them, just like we would in a physical event. But unfortunately, we're not able to do that at this current moment in time. So yeah, I'd really encourage you to follow up on that and share with the speakers as well. But yeah, that point about the North Star is fantastic, because I think it shows that they can really be a guiding compass. That I'm just going to go over to Gavin, actually, in terms of what that means for looking at the practical ways to implement some of those solutions. I know, Gavin, I mentioned at the start that you're a real pioneer in terms of looking at different initiatives around climate action, and in particular reduction of waste in the area that you operate in Courchevel. So in order to do that, I think you've what's interesting is that you've really taken the approach of education, and that's SDG 4. And in doing so, why do you think education is important in progressing circular economy, for example, and also looking at the broader climate agenda in some of the initiatives you've done?
Great, thanks for having us, Sarisha. Real pleasure to be here, and I've joined in a few of the Saturday events already, and they've been really, really, really good and connected with us with some really important people, so it's been really cool. Education-wise, the SDG 4, so I'll briefly describe, I'll try and make it quite brief, describe exactly what we do at one tree at a time, but we're a French not-for-profit that is focused on reducing the environmental impact in our area, in our region. We set up a year ago, and the very first thing we set up was a pledge system, which has been key to educating us and the local community and small businesses as to how they can improve their environmental impact. And we actually loosely built that pledge system around the SDG goals. So essentially we work with lots of small organisations. They commit to our pledge, which has about 50 different pledges. Starts off in the first section with reduction. Second section is, first section is measurement. Second section, reduction. Third section, education. Fourth section is sustainability. And then the fifth section is offsetting. And then we work with the companies in our region to put these pledges into action. So I'll briefly pick on some of the things we put into action. One is we work with a chalet company, for example, and we addressed their food waste issues. So we went in, we did a day's worth of education on how we could reduce their waste. And then we set up a program where we measure and record every day by weight the amount of waste the chalet's made. And then over the season, that helped us work with the staff to reduce that waste. So it's kind of little pledges like that. There's pledges around electricity, pledges around educating staff training. And so we do that with the local businesses, and then we also work with the local community within our Circular Fix-It shop, which I'm shutting right now. It's more of a community space, so I've sat a great big desk at the front of the shop here, and we run regular events on how to repair your ski gear, how to fix your clothing, how to service your bikes. We hold meetings on how we can improve the environmental impacts of our local businesses. So it's kind of like a community space where we try and educate ourselves as well. I think what's been really important during this whole process is now that we've got a collective of businesses and individuals working together, we're constantly learning from each other and we're changing the way we operate. So I think what we've sought to do is provide that space for education. And that's why we think that's a really important part of the Sustainable Development Goals, is providing that space within the community.
I think that's amazing. And what I find fascinating is the fact that you've kind of gone in and done that in a really holistic way for those businesses. So the pledge system kind of does show them the tangible steps they can take. I think a lot of these issues around, I did my thesis around accelerating the circular economy and family-owned. I mean, it's very particular because it is this massive piece of you had to drill down. And I asked a lot of hotels, what do they do on circular economy and what are their perceptions? And a lot of them said, these issues are so big and it's quite complex for them to tackle. And I think what you've done is taken that and said, okay, we can do this in a really practical way, but you've also involved the community in it. And I think communities are such an important part of the SDG agenda. And I think, a lot of large corporates talk about the SDGs, but I think where you've got a brilliant model in what you do is that you've managed to bring together both the SMEs and the community. And I think that model for mountain regions is really critical because that's how you get through change which is led by the community as well. And I think that's a really critical part of the agenda going forward. And we'll be touching upon that a bit later in the breakout sessions as well. So yeah, thanks guys for sharing your perspective on that. So now we're going to move to Alex. So I mentioned that Alex has set up an incredible charity called Mind Over Mountains and looks at how basically nature can be a real healer, to be honest. I love your term mountain medicine, Alex. I think that's brilliant. I think one thing that fascinates me is that in a lot of the research that I did, there was a real longing for people to go back to valuing nature. I think that's prevalent across the whole of the sustainable development agenda in the Alps. But I think what's interesting about your perspective is you look at that in terms of valuing nature for people's well-being, and also looking at how to support the community in that. So I wondered, could you explain a bit about some of your, what impact that has and why that could be important for mountain regions to learn from? I know you're based in the UK and do a lot of work in the Lake District as well, but I think your work and what you're doing is really relevant for the agenda across alpine regions as well.
Sure, yeah, it's nice to be here. I think firstly, let's start with some good positive news, because we've had lots of bad news this year, and I think we've all been forced to do things differently this year, but actually nature is business as usual. It still offers us that same wonderful escape, calm perspective amidst all this chaos that's going on around us. And I think resilience is what, everybody's talking about that at the moment. And I think being in nature provides the perfect place to build that resilience, and stay physically and mentally healthy is key to building, our resilience. And I think having more resilience to stress and, external challenges actually helps us to actually reduce and stop actually stop, these problems actually kind of, it actually stops, these problems actually starting in the first place. It's a natural intervention. So this year, of course, we've all been on the same mountain, but not everybody is a Sherpa, and some people will have found it a lot harder, than most. And we've had this perfect storm for mental ill health, with all the uncertainty, the isolation, the fear, the loss of access to the outdoors and ways to cope. And it's estimated now that over 500,000 additional people in the UK are going to need, additional mental health support in the next 2 years. Yet the actual resources available to support that and the help available has been decreasing in capacity. So how are we going to fill the gap? Well, we all have to find the tools that work for us. And for me personally, spending time in nature has been the most powerful antidepressant. It's been the most powerful tool that I've found in managing my peaks and troughs of mental ill health as a young person. And since discovering being in the outdoors about 10 years ago when I was 14, I found a way in the outdoor challenges to overcome these life challenges that we all face. And spending time in the outdoors, being active, gives us that positive sense of purpose and control. And I think, especially in these uncertain times, we need that guiding purpose, not just pills, which is the common approach. But that's easy for me to say when I live on the edge of the mountains, and 1 in 8 homes in the UK don't even have access to a garden. So last year I co-founded obviously, a new charity, Mind Over Mountains. Yes, sorry. Yeah. We started as a CIC and we became a charity in August, which aims at restoring some mental health through the outdoors. But it's so much more than just being in the fresh air, because we all know it helps. We all know it makes you feel better. But we combine that with, actually NLP and mindfulness and meditation and inspirational speakers, and just like one-to-one support, and counselling, just to create that safe and confidential space for people to have that one-to-one support, to walk and talk, to just reconnect, and just build resilience to the stresses in our everyday lives. And actually having self-awareness is one of the kind of key parts of being resilient, and we provide that space for people, that chance to reset and reflect, which we don't often get in our busy, hectic lives. And on the walks, we always have 5 minutes just to sit in silence, just to look around us and breathe. And how often do we get to do that nowadays? And it's something so simple, but so powerful. Now, obviously, normally our work involves, an overnight event where we're away, actually away in the mountains for 2 or 3 nights. And it gives people a proper escape from Wi-Fi and phone signal and just each other and company. But of course, like most charities, this year, all the restrictions have knocked that on the head. So we've been scratching our heads and we've had to adapt our programs to a one-day event where all the coaching and mindfulness is done virtually before and after the walk instead. And we've adapted around all the guidelines and group sizes to, start the Reconnect Rambles. And actually doing this has allowed us to reach a whole new range of people, and to reduce the anxieties, prior to the walk, by having that kind of pre-walk meeting online. There's something so powerful about walking side by side in the mountains, that makes it easier to talk than face-to-face contact, because we're only competing with ourselves. We're all on that same equal level, and sharing that physical challenge in the mountains, it just reminds us that actually we're all human. We all struggle sometimes. And on our last program, we had a yellow, it was a yellow storm warning. It was raining for the entire day. Yeah, we couldn't see a thing. We were trying to actually wring all the water out of our gloves. We were laughing at the ridiculousness of the situation. And yet, there's nothing a flask of hot chocolate can't fix in the mountains. But that's what real human connection is all about. And Zoom is no substitute for that. And having that sense of teamwork and camaraderie is a key human need to our resilience. We need to feel safe and supported. And that's going to be so important as we brace this storm over the next few months, and hopefully not too much longer. And I think our natural environment is going to be a key part in bringing people back together. So in the last few months, we've done 6 programs for over 50 people, including parents, who've carried the burden of childcare, in lockdown and not had any time for themselves. We've supported, people in the army who've been able to enjoy the outdoors without needing to prove themselves. We've supported people who, who've been off furloughed or working at home or unemployed, who've become isolated and they've lost access. And a whole range of people, people who haven't walked in the mountains for years and years, who've just needed that opportunity to actually gain their confidence back. The list goes on, but many of them have come back on more than one program, and they've now started walking back home on, a regular basis. And I think starting a positive healthy habit in their everyday lives is so important for lasting change. So maybe we just need to create that spark, that one opportunity to help people realise that. And I guess that's where our journey is going right now. So we've been really inspired to see what that can do, and hopefully can help more people just to access the same.
I think that's amazing in lots of the messages that you have there in terms of what you're doing, because I think one is about planting the seed, and I think that's a common thread across different facets of sustainability. One in terms of appreciating nature for our own physical and mental well-being, but another is that we can also see some of those solutions in a mountain context that we could then have in our own daily lives. And I think there's a real symbiotic relationship in terms of the values that people have, and then how they choose to actually enjoy their leisure time and enjoy experiences that could then try and support their behaviour for the long-term change, whether that be about their own mental health, whether it be about taking more activism around some of their climate impact and footprint. I think there's a real important lesson in terms of planting that seed, and also in the community solidarity. I think it's fantastic to hear the diversity of the people that you're supporting to get outdoors and to enjoy nature, and it brings me really nicely onto Karin, actually, because Karin's really tried to tackle this agenda in terms of diversity and inclusion in alpine context. And I know, Karin, you've been working in the space for many years and are actually at the forefront of trying to get results in particular. And I think that's where it's quite interesting, because your change lever is at a result level, but also with individuals that have businesses there to try and understand the needs of people that might feel physically more excluded from a mountain context. But could you explain a bit about why the diversity and inclusion agenda is important in terms of the SDGs in a mountain context, but also why at this present moment in time solidarity is really key? I know in many of the discussions you've had, it's really critical that we try and get more solidarity and common understanding amongst the stakeholders that operate in mountain regions. It's not just a commercial agenda, it's actually a community agenda too. So would you be able to explain a bit about your work in that space? And I know you work across the whole of the Alpine region, so it'd be great to hear your perspective on that.
Thank you. Yes, it is such a diverse subject, and just trying to encapsulate everything for this morning. But I think with really with with the mountains, we're all gathered here today because we have a passion for the mountains, we have an understanding, and we've all discovered it either because we were born there or for personal reasons. And my work came out of a very personal reason of having a daughter born with a catastrophic neurological disorder. And so for me, respite and discovering the mountains allowed me to put an equilibrium back into the family structure, because without that, it's still really important. You need to have that mental health, you need to have everything there. And having driven over 300,000 kilometers around the mountains all throughout the year, I've discovered the most extraordinary places and the most amazing people. But when it comes to SDG 10 and looking at how we do it, I think we have to remind ourselves that we all have a unique DNA, and the mountains, every village, every valley, every situation has its own DNA. And for me, the problem has been that I've seen so many changes in attitudes and changes over the years, but having started the work as a social enterprise of matchmaking, really, people with specific health or medical needs, or just those of all ages and generations and social backgrounds, to find some sort of meaning in their lives and purpose, and rehabilitation through the mountains. Everywhere had something unique to offer, but not every coat fits. There's no such thing as one size fits all. And in my work, I've discovered that there is so much enthusiasm for people within the destinations to reach out and embrace visitors coming. But they don't know kind of where to go or what to do. So just by helping to bring people there, but also raising awareness of what they offer, then I think we really are working at inclusivity and solidarity. But again, what I do see a real void between what comes out and what's discussed at a sort of departmental government level, or even in the cities, just doesn't work in the mountains. It just doesn't work. People don't understand it. And the other aspect of trying to work, I think you have to go back to grassroots. And if there's one thing now with the pandemic, is that we can't really travel like we were. We are kind of now in our own little environment, and it's very easy. I think we're all guilty of forgetting what's on our doorstep. I mean, how many times do people have friends to stay because they want to go and visit a particular museum or to go and do something? And we haven't done it ourselves because it's on our doorstep. Oh, we'll do it tomorrow. We'll do it another day. It doesn't work. And this is an ideal opportunity now for us to actually look at what's in our cupboard, in our house, and do a spring clean and really work with what the local community could benefit from, and then building out from there, rather than being too focused perhaps on what the tourism with the visitors coming in, and quite often demanding access to buildings or access to experiences which are almost impossible, and they frighten people off. So if one can actually build up some sort of coercion within a village and within a local community, and then build out, I think it will be easier to be able to broaden the inclusivity and accessibility on this. But fragmentation is the word that I would say sums up everything. What is in France doesn't work in Austria. What people expect when they go to France isn't in Switzerland, where somewhere else, even within Switzerland, you've got different cantons and different regions, and it doesn't work. And somebody says, but in Austria or in the Tyrol, we have this program, but it's not elsewhere. And it's just trying to be there to support people. And so for me, it's as much as looking at the DNA and understanding that look at what people are good at and what they have, and then build up from there, rather than coming in and saying, okay, this is what we need to do by 2030. it's just not going to work. You have to do it step by step. And then we will get to this North Star, this guiding compass of it.
I think I love what you say in that DNA point, because I think in order to address those solutions, that bottom-up approach is really critical. I think when I was doing the engagement around SATI, I think a lot of the stakeholders felt like some of the solutions that I was talking about when I initially started the project back in 2018 were very much top-down. Like, you know, how can we possibly implement that? We're a small sole trader, or, you know, a small business. And I think that's where some of the examples that we'll talk about in the breakout session in around 30 minutes are really critical, because we'd love to hear everybody's on-the-ground perspectives of that. Just a quick thing, please do submit questions via the chat function, because we'll be moving to Q&A in around 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to bring Gabby in actually on that regional perspective, because it's really interesting to hear how in the Salzburg land you work with businesses, and as the economic chamber, do you notice that regional specificity, and what do you see as some of those levers to engage businesses? You know, is it education? Is it funding? Is it information sharing? Is it collaboration amongst each other? Where do you see those change levers in the Salzburg land context?
Yes, hello to everyone. Thank you, Sarisha, for having me on the panel here. I'm very excited about it, and also very excited that, you know, I see Zellamsee here in the background. Yes, I mean, I have to agree to what you just said, or what Catherine has alluded to. I think it's very much a bottom-up approach, and I see that businesses we engage with businesses a lot, as you mentioned, are very willing to implement certain aspects of sustainability, if not all, if they know how they can go about it, and they know about the benefits that are in there for them as well. So I would say that generally businesses are very open to that, and sometimes this bottom-up approach is probably more, you can more easily win people over than if you do a top-down approach. So I guess many of these are grassroots or more grassroots movements and things that have been implemented. Nevertheless, in order to become this guiding star, as Karin has mentioned already, I guess it needs some policies as well at the end, because you need, especially when it comes to economic development and SDGs and economic growth, there are so many aspects in terms of law in there with regards to how you employ workers and all that. So I think it has to be from both sides, depending on what has to be achieved or wants to be achieved.
Really interesting on the legal and the policy lever, because I think that's something that I came across very strongly in my research as well, that the government has quite an important role to play in bringing those businesses along, but also in businesses guiding policy in quite a symbiotic way. So we're just going to flick across a slightly closing panel question before we go to Q&A. I can see some of the questions coming in via the chat as well, which is great. So in terms of a quick closer for the panel before we go to Q&A, can you all hear me okay?
You break it.
Yeah, break it on and off.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Is it okay now, or?
Yeah.
Yeah? Apologies about this. I think we're having some connection issues. Sorry. Like connection issues. Okay, is that better? Is that okay? Sorry about this. It's perils of technology, unfortunately. So yeah, I'm just going to switch to a quick roundup of the questions in terms of for the panel. So I just wanted to know, in terms of each of you, what do you think is the missing link for a quick 1 minute to scale up SDG implementation? So we're going to just do a quick round table, starting with Karin and then moving to Gavin, Alex, Catherine and Gabriele.
So I guess it's my turn again. The missing link, I think, and it has been mentioned before, is that we are able to reach the hearts of the people, that this is a vision that they want, or a future that they want to live in. When I teach my students, most of them have not heard about this possibility of a future yet, because what they hear and read in the media is it's going to be a catastrophe because we cannot do anything anymore, or the other way, we will be run by artificial intelligence and robots, and this is our future, and we will all lose our jobs. So the dystopias that we have about a future vision are not. There are no good ones around, and actually, this is a good one that no one knows about. But if we ask people, like on the ground, what do you imagine or want your life to be like in 20 years from now, they would all around the globe, and I do this constantly with students everywhere, what should your future be like? They all come up with, I want to live in a healthy environment, I want to live in nature, I want to live in peace, I want to be healthy. So we all around the world, people want the same, but they seem to have the feeling that this is not possible. And I think for me, this is a missing link that from politics, as Gabriele mentioned, to businesses as multiplicators to people by providing workplaces, products, services. We need to have this distributed, that this is a future that is possible if we start going all at once. And to me, this is a missing link.
That's great. And I think you bring a real optimism there. And I think, Gavin, I'm just going to switch to you because I think you probably share that sentiment of optimism.
Yeah, I was saying earlier, I find this question quite difficult because I do share a lot of optimism, and maybe because I'm immersed in this field, on things like SATI, the conversation we had yesterday, another meeting, it just feels like the solutions are there. Like, it just needs upscaling personally. Like, so for what we do connect with the local community. We do provide some of that hope. We do give solutions. We do receive solutions from the community. We just need to do it on a bigger scale. We just need to replicate a lot of these things. So from all the other speakers, they were talking about planting the seeds, rethinking the way we live. Like, the solutions are there and available. We just need to upscale as much as we can, really. I don't think it's a question of, like, what is the barrier? I just kind of think we need to just get going.
I love that. I love the can-do attitude. Alex, You have quite a similar approach, to be honest, in terms of getting things done and really having a lot of determination in that space. So do you think that's the missing link in terms of scaling up and getting people to kind of be more aware of this, or where do you see that in terms of the mental health and wellbeing space?
So it's a challenge. That's the first attitude to have. And then I think after that, our biggest challenge is going to be helping the people that actually need it most, because also mental health itself, becomes a major barrier to people. And to get people to take that first step and commit can be incredibly difficult because of their circumstances. So it's more about making these things more accessible. And some people are so isolated because of where they live or their background that actually for them to get to the mountains or national parks can take hours and hours unless they have a car. So we're trying to do that by expanding to all 15 of the UK national parks in the next 2 years. Another challenge is a lot of these people have the hardship and actually financial circumstances. A lot of them are unemployed because of their health. So for that, we have bursaries for people just to try and make these things more accessible for them. And those who are now they're unemployed, which of course is sadly rising in number because of the last sort of few months we've had. I think mostly that we know that a lot of people don't have the confidence or the skills to go out walking alone, especially if you have anxiety or mental health problems. So we just provide that safe and supportive environment to stretch themselves without putting themselves at risks, and just guiding them through the process, I think, has been really key for us. And I think really it's just about creating that spark for people, helping them take that first step and making them feel supported. So I think, like the others have said, it's about, we know it works, it's just taking that to the people that need it most, rather than preaching to those who already understand, and that's our challenge for the year ahead, really. But we know it helps. It's just this year has given us a great opportunity to highlight the importance of that for people, and we'd love people to join us on that journey and move more minds over mountains, really.
Yeah, and I think that guiding point that you mentioned is really critical. I know, Catherine, in the discussions that you have, do you think that's also the key in terms of guiding and those collaborations and partnerships? Because I think obviously scaling up, as Alex mentioned, in terms of with lots of national parks requires a lot of collaboration, and I think that's something that's common across the alpine regions too. Would you agree that it's kind of partnerships and is that the key to scaling up? Like, what would you say?
Yeah, absolutely, and it is, as Gavin said, we're all, everything is there in place. It's just a question of moving forward with it, and it is really about partnerships. But it's also, I think, really important that we in the sort of industry or with social enterprises, non-profits that we all have, or different businesses, and the destinations in the mountains, we can do much. But I really do feel really important that the individual has to be accountable and stand up and to be aware of what the SDGs are all about, and be working as well and not dictating to a destination what they should have in place, but everybody should be looking at it and sitting around a table basically and looking at it and putting it together. It shouldn't just be left to one side to do, but it is also about understanding the market in a way and working through it. But it's exciting. Everything is changing. There's something for everybody. And let's face it, the mountains, most of these regions, we've been offering some sort of experience for well-being for thousands of years.
Yes, it's true. It was the start of it.
So, yeah, we can do it.
And I think there's a lot in there about learning from the past. I know that in a lot of the conversations I had with hoteliers, for example, some of the solutions they're implementing now are solutions that their, grandparents were looking at, and yet it's kind of been potentially lost over those years. So yeah, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from history as well, I guess. Gabby, I'm going to end with you on the panel side in terms of just saying whether you think there's a couple of things that are missing to move forward, and where do you see that going? I know that the education space is obviously very strong there, and I think in all the discussions I have, it feels like this knowledge sharing is really critical. I wonder if you see the same thing. I think we'll just give it a minute. Gabby?
Yes, here I am. Sorry, that was my fault. Yes, there are 2 points I wanted to mention. So education is certainly, to me, fundamental, enabling people, but also to educate businesses, to educate basically every one of us in the SDGs, and also in how to achieve this, to get to the SDGs. I like this notion of circular economy that is around now, because I think that already sums up a little bit more of what we have to do. And so also to educate people on that would, to me, is very critical. But I would also like to refer to it in the chat is a question. I think it was addressed to me more or less. I think economic growth, as we know, yes and no, because the growth of the economy has changed over the last decades. How we achieve this growth has changed dramatically. And I do agree that we still have to change in that as well to be able to constantly grow economically. So I think this notion of circular economy and how we look at economy now is certainly helping of achieving the SDG 8 in this respect. So yes and no.
And actually, I'd like to add to that as well, because I used to be an economist. That was kind of my background, and it was interesting because back when I started studying economics, it wasn't even on the radar to look necessarily in mainstream economics at sustainable development as a critical issue. And I've seen a huge shift over the last decade, I would say, since starting doing economics, that actually now this agenda of climate risk in particular, it's really still centered around climate risk, and climate change is on the forefront of many of the central banks, including banks as well. I do myself work for a large French bank called BNP Paribas, and I think one thing I would say is that I think what's interesting is often the question of the economy is also the question of the financial system and the question of businesses and the question of government as well as communities. And I think we're seeing a really incredible shift in many of those large businesses, many of those intergovernmental institutions and central banks to actually look at new ways of looking at the economy in light of climate risk. And I think I'm happy, Pamela, to have a discussion with you about that at some point, because it'd be really interesting to hear your perspectives, and maybe it will come out in the breakout session that we're going to have. I would encourage you all to please submit questions via the chat function as well, just because then we can take any questions that you might have in there. I think, Pamela, I don't know if you want to unmute if you have anything else to add to that question, or happy to take other questions that are coming in as well. I think we have a question actually from Meryl around the scaling up and the speed of the scaling up. I might pose this to Karin, actually, because I think you work so closely with multiple different stakeholders. How do we speed up this whole process, and what do you think is going to be required in terms of, if you look at the next year in particular, we're kind of going in the road towards COP, still in this world of COVID-19 impact. So do you think we're on a faster trajectory than we were, and how do we speed that up?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the brilliant questions in the chat, because I think this is the growth question is so obvious and comes up immediately in the goals when you look at them. How can never-ending growth within a finite system actually be even thought about? And I think one of the things we also have to rethink or redefine is, what is growth and what does it mean? Is growth dependent on resource and energy use, like in the GDP currently, or do we need to redefine growth, or should growth rather be a word or a measure for well-being? And this is, and I'm so impressed by the project that I have been introduced to now here on this panel. Alex, Karin, amazing. Gavin, it's so much needed bottom up and top down, and I'm absolutely with Gabriele. We also need the right political frameworks and directives to have a push and pull for each and every one, because we are not going to shift our mindsets overnight. Some of us already have, and this is where I see a trajectory. It's not post-COVID. What was the word, Sarisha, you used?
COVID impacted.
COVID impacted. Yes, I love it.
From one of my team at work. Yeah. I have to admit, it's definitely my colleague's term.
Super nice. I heard it today for the first time. I'm going to adapt immediately, because it's so true. We are in the middle of this transition already, and COVID actually is just one of the phenomena, together with climate phenomena that we're already experiencing, that is coming from our misguided use of finite resources here on this planet, including land use. And this has led us where we are now. And I can really see globally, worldwide, so many discussions about how can we take this now as a chance to rethink things and the way we're doing it. And I can very well see businesses around the world doing this, whether they are large or small. And as this has come up, the instruments on how to do this, this is crucial, because yes, the SDGs are a vision, a way to go, but they don't pose a roadmap or a checklist for each and every one, because those ways to go there will be so different for everyone. And I think this came out beautifully now in the discussion. But there are tools. As Gavin said, we do have the knowledge, we do have the money, because there is enough money around, and once we can allocate investments rather to more sustainable ones, and to invest into the future and not into past technologies or past businesses, this could really be a change maker. And to be honest, I see this happening already. I wouldn't say I'm an optimist, but I'm a positivist. And the glass is always half full, despite it may be half empty, and we are talking about the same thing. But actually, I can see things happening already. And yes, what it really needs is tools. And we need to provide those tools for each and every one, whether it's for teachers in education, for students to learn new tools when they come out of their business schools, out of their universities. This is not happening to a great extent yet. There is a lot of interest in younger generations, but they are still taught the old stuff that we've been teaching for the past 50 years. And those instruments for management are not applicable for sustainability, It's not possible. There are already new economic theories around, like donut economy or economics or others, and circular economy certainly is a good lever that will help us bring things on the ground and apply measures in the way we treat resources or use resources or own or whatever, have a service from them. And I think all of this together from different directions will create this mind shift in each and every one, and not only in European or industrialized country regions. This mindset is already around in many of the developed or developing or underdeveloped countries. And as you said this before, Sarisha, there are so many things we here have been doing 50 years ago, and things are still being done in a very sensible way in developing countries. But let's not teach them the wrong way to go. Let's teach them to go from dirty and poor to rich and clean, and let's skip for them the turn we took to rich and dirty, which we are now trying to struggle to get out because it's hard. But this needs partnerships, and I'm absolutely with Karin and with Alex and Gavin and Gabriele. This is the key. To create partnerships, learn from each other, and scale things, because so we don't have tiny little needle stitches here and there, but bring it to scale it up and really make it impactful. This, I think, needs to be done.
I think that's fantastic, and you've given us all a real injection of energy in terms of how we can look at this both holistically but on the ground as well. I think that there's so many levers that you all mentioned this afternoon, and I'm really excited to kind of think about how we could then explore some of those with each of you and expand this discussion in the coming months ahead as well. In fact, that brings me really nicely onto the breakout sessions, because they're some of the things that you mentioned about, in particular, Karin, about the developing world context, and also the leapfrogging and why it's critical to embrace the existing technologies to do that is a great chance to bring in Meryl and Natasha. So they are good friends of mine from CISL, as I mentioned, but also experts in their own right in their respective fields of infrastructure and also in the legal and policy space. So I'm just going to invite Meryl and Natasha. Meryl, if you could do a quick intro on what you're interested in and your research area. I think at the same time, Dan, if you could set up the breakout sessions, that would be great, just because we're going to be moving to breakout sessions in around kind of 3 to 4 minutes or so, where the three of us will be actually delving in a bit more detail and discussing with each of you your perspectives as well. Meryl, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me? All right.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Hi there. So I'm Meryl Wingfield. I work in sustainability in the energy sector, and at the moment I'm looking a lot at how you can embed sustainability in big corporates in all of what they do, processes, tools, governance, etc., to really make it happen. While I was at Cambridge with Sharissa, I researched circular business models in the solar sector in particular, which was fascinating. I also try and put the circular economy into practice by volunteering at my local repair cafe where I live. And I'm also a volunteer with one of the UK's rewilding charities some more on the strategic side, but they're really focused on how can we rewild more land in the UK. It's one of the things I'm really passionate about is how can we use nature-based solutions to solve the climate crisis as well as the biodiversity crisis and many other things. So that's a real passion of mine.
And also, I would hugely encourage you to all follow Meryl on Twitter. I think she's probably the most active person I know at sharing lots of content on this topic and very engaged on the nature space. I think valuing nature space is so critical right now in terms of the COVID crisis and how we can look at that as a pathway to move forward on addressing the biodiversity crisis as well. I think, Natasha, if I could welcome you to, and also Natasha's amazingly, as I mentioned earlier, for those of you that weren't on the call at the start, is joining from Australia, so she's got a very interesting perspective on the Asia-Pacific region and some of the projects that you've run there as well, Natasha.
Yeah, thanks, Rish. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me along, and the speakers, they were really wonderful. So I'm Natasha, and I'm a lawyer and a consultant based down in Australia. So for my day job, I advise predominantly government, donor agencies and the private sector across Australia and the Pacific region. So for the master's program that I've been doing with Rish and Meryl, my specific research interest is the role that regulation and policy has as a lever for change to achieve sustainability. So I really want to understand how we can better use regulation and policy to effectively incentivise sustainable business and incentivise sustainable economy, and really importantly correct those market failures from the linear economic models. So my dissertation and my individual research projects have really focused around SDG 12, which is sustainable production and consumption. So for my dissertation, I applied this lens in the context of Australia to look at product stewardship and sustainable waste regulation and policy, and what that really should look like and how we can get there. So quite an unsexy area of sustainability, but I really like waste. And then my individual research project, I looked at Fiji and why it has such a monumental waste challenge, despite the fact that the regulatory and policy frameworks on paper are incredibly sophisticated, and tourism played a huge role in that research. So I suppose whilst alpine tourism, Australian tourism and Pacific tourism can seem really dissimilar on the surfaces, the complexities of those systemic issues and really the challenges to finding solutions that everyone's talked about today really came across in my research in the Australian and Pacific context. So I think that's really interesting and important to remember that everything that everyone's been talking about really does translate across the world. So if any of the research areas that I'm working in interest you, please feel free to get in touch, and I'm looking forward to chatting with some of you in the breakout.
Yeah, and please do connect with us, speakers, everyone. I'd really encourage that, and I'm happy to share the link to the presentation after as well, so you can connect with everyone. So we're going to move into the breakout sessions now. So the way that those will work is essentially you'll receive a message on your screen or your phone in a moment to say join breakout room. Please do click join, because then you'll be transported to a room that's led by myself, Natasha or Meryl, and we'll be running through some of those practical examples and also hearing your perspectives on where the gaps are to scale up, because from my side, the objective of this is that at the end of the year, we'll also be producing a report on looking at where some of those levers are and what the key findings from STATI were, so that we can then work with policymakers, with SMEs, with companies, with communities to try and actually scale up some of the implementation of the things that we've talked about here today. So I think, Dan, if we could open the breakout rooms, that would be great. And sorry, just to say that after the breakout rooms, we'll return back into this main room in 20 minutes time for a reflection session, where we'll be presenting back the findings of what we've all talked about in that session. Really interesting in our session was the fact that we focused quite a lot on where the current focus areas of the SDGs are in contexts that we all are working in and based in. And I think education was really highlighted, and I think that's an area where there's so much that can be done in terms of education then impacting the others. So in terms of sharing knowledge gaps, bridging dialogues was a key theme in our breakout session. I know that, Regina, you mentioned that actually there's lots of targets and different stories, but it's about bringing the right relevant dialogue to that stakeholder. Karin, I know that in the session you said about the importance of tools and goals, and that we really have to get people to understand the system of the SDGs, what they are, how they apply, how this lovely, colourful mix of blocks can actually be something that's useful for implementation. I know, Alex, you'd covered a bit about why we actually need experts on board as well, and how that's quite critical in terms of addressing some of the challenges. And finally, just to end, I think we talked quite a lot about why essentially we have to have a kind of holistic picture, but we also have to have really tangible measurement and management of where we're going on this. So, set indicators which are derived from the actual goals. So I think there's a real question about bringing tangibility, bridging dialogues, and crucially sharing knowledge through experts. I'm just going to welcome Meryl to give a quick debrief as well of your session, Meryl.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, we didn't get very far through the questions, Rish, because we got into the beginning. So there was a big, I guess, a common theme from everybody about the feeling of optimism that came from the panelists, and about, we know what we need to do, we just need to get on and do it, and a real feeling of positivity on that. And we talked about on the ground how it's accelerating really fast in some places, but that also we need, how do we engage with sort of the general public and, the man on the street, if you like, around people understanding, what are these scary things, the SDGs with all the different colours and the numbers, and how do we talk about it in a way that makes it real for people, so they can understand why it's important, what it means for them, and importantly, what can they do? So how can you have an individual impact? And Gavin gave a great example of an online festival that he's just been running that included getting individuals to pledge what they would do differently to reduce their footprint or have a more positive impact. We'd also just started talking about the challenges with people living in the mountains not being included necessarily by maybe policymakers who sit in an urban area, and that mountains maybe are not thought about or included as much as they should be. And we were just finishing and cut James off with a question from Gavin to say, you're coming from outside the industry, what do you think? And we're just about whether you could see change happening or not. And James didn't really get a chance to finish on that thought because we all got whipped back here. So that's my
James,
very brief summary.
Reflect on that? Happy for you to add to that, James.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my view, and I think it's a great question. And ultimately, I think that I see a lot of hope, but I think in some respects, preaching to the choir a little bit here, because I love the mountains, and I can't imagine a future where I don't have access to the mountains and I can't take my son skiing. So, I look at this from a purely personal perspective. I really hope we can make a change. I think the challenge that we often face is how you make individuals feel like they can actually make a difference, how you can give people hope. And I love the optimism, and as Meryl said, I think there was that general sense in the group that the optimism that we've discussed here has been fantastic, because it's really nice to hear, because it's too easy, I think, to feel like it's hopeless and you can't really do anything. So how do you get people who maybe aren't involved in this on a day-to-day basis to feel like they can make a difference? How do you get people who aren't involved in this on a day-to-day basis to feel like it's important? And that's a really important thing. And ultimately, from my view, SDGs are great, but they don't really mean that much to me. And I mean that in a bigger picture way. How do I honestly make a difference? And that's really what I want to know. And how do I make a difference that isn't necessarily going to, I guess, is how do I make a difference that I can do without radically changing everything about every facet of my life. And I think if we can get people to understand that, we can make such a huge difference to this. How do I make a difference if I'm coming skiing for 1 week a year? And I think really that's just about how we get the messaging through.
I think the derivative of SDGs is super interesting, to take like those issues and then say, okay, which different initiatives are focusing on that. I'd encourage you to look at, I'll share it afterwards on the email, but Gavin did a brilliant series recently called Citizens of Winter. And you basically, Gavin, you interviewed like a bunch of people that are looking at those on-the-ground solutions and really grassroots solutions as well, because it's a podcast series and also available on Facebook, I think. But I'll put it in the chat actually. I don't know, Gav, can you put it in the chat, just like the website or something?
Yeah, pop it in there. I'll
just because some people can go to that as well. Just because I think that on-the-ground examples are really critical, and I think through SATI we're trying to do that both bridging at a corporate and community level, but I think the session, Gav's got some great examples of where that's being done and some experts that are working in that space, specifically, James, in how to, you know, green your ski holiday, how to ensure that your gear is greener, how to talk about it. And from my side, I really think we have to use our voice as well. You know, I've got to be honest, 3 years ago, I'd never heard of circular economy. And then I realized that researching it was such a critical lever to try and change. And, you know, when I heard about these SDGs, I thought, this is amazing, because we've got suddenly this great compass. And maybe I just love maps and hiking too much, but it's a compass is a very, very cool thing. But I think it really is quite exciting that we're all looking at this from such a diverse perspective. I have to admit, when we were putting the session together, I initially kind of sat down with a blank piece of paper and thought, okay, where are we going to take this session? Because there's just such a broad agenda, but I felt like having practical sustainability champions was really a key part of this session, and I wanted to thank you all for being part of that journey today, and also part of the wider SATI journey too. I think all of you have been in some way supporting that, whether you're just joining today for the first time or whether you've kind of been meeting me every month over the last 2 years. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for that. And do stay tuned for the session that we've got at the end of November. It's on the 20th, and it's going to be specifically on hotels and really embedding sustainability into the guest experience, because I wanted to take quite a multi-sectoral approach to SATI, and this next session will be quite a deep dive on hotels, and I think Regina will also be a speaker there for that. So yeah, very much looking forward to that, and I'll share the details about that with all of you. But thank you so much for joining today, and really appreciate it. I think it's great to connect with each of you, and can't thank you enough for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.